God gives some people more advantages than others. One man is born free with excellent parents, a good education, and food on the table. Another is born amidst danger, receives no schooling, and endures the daily challenge to eat. Three men that enjoyed immense privilege in their youth were Nicene theologians known as the Cappadocian Fathers, because they were natives of the province of Cappadocia in modern-day Turkey. The most formidable of the three was Basil of Caesarea, sometimes called Basil the Great, not only for his tremendous influence upon the church, but for his generosity toward the needy. Born in AD 330, Basil of Caesarea did not grow up with empty pockets. God filled his life with an abundance of privileges, which helped him impact the church later in life. Basil's family had deep Christian roots. Grandparents, uncles, and aunts on both his mother's and his father's side had been devout Christians, especially his mother, Macrina the Elder. His parents may have been landowners in a time when most people were very poor. His sister, Macrina the Younger, maintained an excellent testimony in the community. And despite their early spiritual formation, Basil and his 9 siblings were not baptized until they reached maturity. Basil's brother Gregory, later known as Gregory of Nyssa, was more quiet and humble than his brother, though he too became a great bishop. He differed from the other Cappadocians because he married and had children. Basil received an excellent education. He studied in some of the greatest cities in the world, such as Caesarea, Constantinople, and Athens. He was classmates with Gregory of Nazianzus, who became one of the great theologians of the ancient church, and Julian the Apostate, who became Roman emperor, an enemy of Christianity. Around this time, God used a bishop to prompt Basil's conversion. The schools where he studied only convinced him that the world yielded foolish wisdom. He wrote, "Much time had I spent in vanity, and had wasted nearly all my youth in the vain labor which I underwent in acquiring the wisdom made foolish by God. Then once upon a time, like a man roused from deep sleep, I turned my eyes to the marvelous light of the truth of the gospel, and I perceived the uselessness of the wisdom of the princes of this world that come to naught. I wept many tears over my miserable life, and I prayed that guidance might be vouchsafed to me to admit me to the doctrines of true religion." Basil enjoyed great friendships in life. One of his closest companions was Gregory, the same name as his brother Gregory of Nyssa, only this was Gregory of Nazianzus, sometimes called Gregory the Theologian because of the brilliant books he penned against false doctrine. Like Jonathan and David, Gregory and Basil formed a close friendship, standing together against the enemies of Christianity. Sadly, a quarrel broke out between the two friends. After Basil had become bishop, he gained authority over Gregory, as Gregory was only a presbyter, though they shared the same age. Basil sent him to serve in a difficult and insignificant townlet, which offended Gregory. He was disgusted by such a distasteful post, and while at first he obliged, he soon returned home. There's no indication their falling out ever fully healed, though Gregory preached Basil's funeral. Basil responded in 3 ways to his early privileges, refusing to bury the talents God had bestowed him. Providence had given him 5 bags of silver, and only a life of focused dedication would bring the words of Master Jesus, "Well done, good and faithful servant." First, Basil became a great bishop. After returning from school, he taught students rhetoric until he gave that up and tried living a life of asceticism like his sister. Now, asceticism had become popular in the 3rd century among those who saw comfortable living as a great enemy of the church. The only hope to avoid such temptations, in their minds, was the monastic life, escaping human society and living in seclusion. Any elevation of status was frowned upon, with monks being discouraged from even seeking ordination. For example, there lived in Egypt at this time 4 long-limbed monks named the Tall Brothers. When the church urged one of them to become a bishop, the monk cut off his left ear, thinking a mutilated man could not become a bishop. And if they continued to stand in his way, he threatened to cut out his tongue. For some time, Basil ate meager meals and wore but a single garment, but he couldn't follow through. Like Jerome, his strict ascetic practices damaged his health. Even later in life, after his fame had risen, Basil was sickly. Instead, he lived with other Christians in a community where they gave much of their time to prayer and helping the poor. This modest lifestyle served him well later in life when authorities threatened him with death. Ultimatums Basil considered fit for little boys. A man of luxury may have buckled beneath the pressure, but not Basil, saying, "All that I have that you can confiscate are these rags and a few books. Nor can you exile me, for wherever you send me, I shall be God's guest. As to tortures, you should know that my body is already dead in Christ, and death would be a great boon to me, leading me sooner to God." Basil's accuser was dumbstruck, saying he had never been spoken to like that by a bishop. Basil replied, "Perhaps that is because you have never met a true bishop." After a while, Basil left the monastic life at age 40 and became a bishop. He excelled at preaching and overseeing the churches under his care. He helped the church by creating a well-ordered pattern of worship called a liturgy. He also protected his church when Emperor Julian ridiculed them. Once, after Basil had rebuked pagan religion, Julian replied, "I have read, I have understood, and I have condemned." Basil parried, saying, "You have read, but you have not understood. For had you understood, you would not have condemned." Though Basil the bishop no longer lived a monastic life, he kept a soft spot for those that denied self, like the Cappadocian hermit Gordius, martyred for his faith a decade before Basil was born. He devotes a portion of a sermon to the beloved anchorite, saying, "The order was given by the governor. Call the lictors. Where are the plates of lead? Where are the scourges? Let him be stretched upon a wheel. Let him be wrenched upon the rack. Let the instruments of torture be brought in. Make ready the beasts, the fire, the sword, the cross. What a good thing for the villain that he can die only once." "Nay," replied Gordius, "what a bad thing for me that I cannot die for Christ again and again." Second, Basil defended the faith. As a bishop, theologian, and apologist, he guarded his congregations from false doctrine, including attacks on the Trinity. At first, Basil held some unbiblical views of Christ's deity, but good brothers changed his mind and he became a firm supporter of the Nicene Creed, that Trinitarian statement penned 5 years before Basil's birth. The Cappadocians also helped distinguish 2 important Greek words at the center of intense debate: ousia and hypostasis. Some were using the terms as synonyms, but the Cappadocians convinced the church this was an error. Ousia, from which we receive the Athanasian homoousios, should only be employed when referring to the one divine nature, meaning the Father and Son are one ousia, one essence, and not two ousiai. Moreover, hypostasis, from which we get the hypostatic union, should only be used to describe the distinction between the persons of the Father and Son. This means God is three hypostases in one ousia. A simple Trinitarian formula goes thus: one God, three persons, each one truly God. Because the government carried considerable power over the church, the Emperor Valens attempted to persuade Basil to adopt or at least compromise on the Arian teaching that Jesus is not God. Basil refused. The Arian controversy had permeated the conversations of those living in Constantinople at that time, which Gregory of Nazianzus captures so well. If you ask a person to give you some small change for a large coin, his response is to philosophize about what distinguishes the Father from the Son. If you ask about the price of a loaf, the shopkeeper's response is that the Father is greater and the Son is inferior. If you ask a bath attendant whether your bath is ready, you will have to rest satisfied with the attendant's response that the Son has been generated out of nothing. Third, Basil felt deep concern for the plight of the poor. Leprosy was somewhat common in those days, meaning lepers were shunned and died a slow, painful death. But Basil loved them, sometimes bandaging and washing their wounds himself. He started a soup kitchen for the starving and outcast after a severe famine struck. He preached practical sermons, encouraging his people to help the poor. And in time, the cluster of buildings, poorhouses, schools, orphanages, and hospitals that centered around the church just outside Caesarea became known as Basiliad. It became a haven of safety for travelers, orphans, and lepers. Basil personally supervised the work, seeking to obey the command of James 1:27 to care for the destitute. People received shelter free of charge as well as medical help. It was staffed by monks and nuns as well as professional doctors and funded by donations from the rich. Some believe the medical center at Basiliad was the world's first hospital, demonstrating that Christians care deeply about helping the sick. At Basil's funeral, his good friend Gregory Nazianzen compared the hospital and poorhouses in Basiliad to some of the ancient wonders of the world, like the pyramids and the gardens of Babylon. He said, "Go forth a little way from the city and behold the new city, the storehouse of piety, the common treasury of the wealthy, where disease is regarded in a religious light and disaster is thought a blessing and sympathy is put to the test." In Basil's homily to the rich, he doesn't say it is wrong to have money, but rather it is sinful to love it and hoard it for personal pleasure in the sight of the destitute. But how do you make use of money? By dressing in expensive clothing? Won't 2 yards of tunic suffice you, and the covering of 1 coat satisfy all your need of clothes? 1 bread loaf is enough to fill a belly. For it is right to regard the use of money as a matter of stewardship, not of selfish enjoyment. What answer shall you make to the judge, you who dress walls but will not clothe a man, who spruce up horses and overlook an unfashionable brother, who leave grain to rot but will not feed the starving, who bury your money and despise the oppressed? Basil died in 379 at the young age of 49. The great Cappadocians, along with Athanasius, were the 4 doctors of the Eastern Church. When it comes to matters of theology in the 4th century, the Fathers know best. But Basil's greatest contribution remains the hospitality and sympathy he showed to the poor, moral lessons he learned in his youth, and then stewarded throughout life to the glory of God.